Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. We have special guest Dr. Micheal Salla, a pioneer in the development of exopolitics, the political study of key actors, institutions, and processes associated with extraterrestrial life. His interest in exopolitics evolved out of his investigation of the source of international conflict and its relationship to an extraterrestrial presence that is not acknowledged to the general public, elected officials, or even senior military officials. Internationally renowned scholar in politics, conflict resolution, author, researcher, lecturer, and key figure for the disclosure movement, Dr. Salla has published several groundbreaking books and articles discussing exopolitics, implications of the extraterrestrial presence, exposing U.S. government policies on extraterrestrial life, galactic diplomacy, getting to yes with E.T., Kennedy's last stand, Eisenhower, UFOs, MJ-12, and JFK's assassination, and his most recent work, Insiders Reveal Secret Space Programs and Extraterrestrial Alliances. In that book, he analyzes whistleblower testimonies revealing the extent of classified space programs and extraterrestrial diplomacy. Check out Dr. Salla's work at www.exopolitics.org. Micheal, thank you so much for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. How's it going?
Thanks, Rex. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you. I've been following your work now for some time. You've been a real key figure in the disclosure movement now for years, and you certainly have led a very fascinating life. Now, I gave a pretty good introduction about the work that you do and the books that you've authored, but for those that haven't had an opportunity to learn about you before and follow your work, just give us a quick idea on who you are and essentially how you became such an expert in these topics.
Sure, Rex. I was a professor of international politics with a specialty in international conflict. And in 2001, when I held a full-time appointment at American University in Washington, D.C., I watched the Disclosure Project press conference that had been organized by Dr. Stephen Greer, where there were 21 whistleblowers revealing what they knew about a cover-up of extraterrestrial life. And I can honestly say that it really changed my life. Up until that time, I was a pretty conventional scholar of international politics. And once I watched that video and listened to those whistleblowers, I realized that this was a very real phenomenon, and that there were very credible people who were having experiences about this cover-up, and it of course affected the way in which international politics was being conducted. And so for me, I just saw this as a natural evolution from studying politics at an international level to studying politics at a planetary, interplanetary level, if you like.
Sure, you took it a step further. That's incredible. And one of the things that I was watching a video of a presentation that you put together, I think it was in 2014, and you were showing different slides and case studies of people that claim they were our space brothers or ETs, and they looked totally human, and they acted like us, they sounded like us. But one in particular that really caught my eye was Valiant Thor. And I was hoping you could talk to us about a few of those really cool claims, and then we could segue from there.
Sure. Well, this has been one of those issues that has been a part of the extraterrestrial phenomenon for some years. I think the person that brought that issue, with a lot of kind of weight into the disclosure movement was a Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean, who worked with NATO headquarters, and he says that back in 1964, he went into a secure location in the supreme headquarters of NATO that was at the time based in Paris, and he says he saw a report called The Assessment. And he says that in the assessment, it described what NATO had discovered through its military investigators, that in fact there was an extraterrestrial presence, and that some of these extraterrestrials looked so much like us that they were indistinguishable, and they could easily infiltrate human society. And for the military hierarchy, this was a big concern because it meant that extraterrestrials could have infiltrated not only the upper echelons of the NATO military hierarchy, but have even infiltrated the political hierarchy of major nations such as the United States or Britain, France, and other countries. So Robert Dean's testimony really got a lot of people interested in this possibility that extraterrestrials could be living amongst us, because he had so much credibility, and he was actually holding that rank of Command Sergeant Major, which in the military hierarchy is the very senior non-commissioned ranking. So definitely that opened the door to many people considering this possibility.
You know, and I also heard you talk about James Gilliland, and we've had the opportunity to speak with him here before at the Leak Project. Really cool guy. I've definitely got to get out to his ranch and video record some of the just amazing phenomenons that take place out there. But could you tell us a little bit about the experience you had out there?
Sure. Well, I went out there in 2006. I attended one of his conferences as a presenter, and then he had these nightly sky watchings, and I stayed there for a few days after the event, and it was frankly very impressive. I mean, what we were seeing in the sky were these lights that would travel across the sky, and James would do these intention experiments where he said, well, you know, everyone send a thought to that light and let's see what happens. And so as people did that, many of these lights would just kind of like pulse very, very brightly, and it seemed to be in some way connected to people's thoughts. So that was very impressive, because it seemed that whatever it was that was piloting that craft could somehow monitor human consciousness and respond to that. You know, while it wasn't the reason why I got into this field, it certainly was a very impressive demonstration of something that could have been an extraterrestrial craft.
How close did it get to you guys?
It was very high. I mean, it was looking, it was definitely well above the kind of height that an aircraft would be traveling. So we're talking about 50,000 feet or higher than that. So it was very distant, but it was just this pulsing that it would do periodically as it would go across the sky that got us interested.
And where does James think that they actually come from, the ones that he kind of manifests with his mind?
Well, James says that many of the craft that he sees from his Mount Adams ranch are associated with the Pleiadian extraterrestrials. He says that there's a base at Mount Adams, that these extraterrestrials have a base. And I can't remember if he said it was part of the Confederation of Planets, but certainly that's a term that's used by many whistleblower or many contactees like James to describe a kind of grouping of very positive, benevolent extraterrestrials that interact with private civilians. And James has a collection of photographs as well and videos showing some strange things coming out of the Mount Adams. So yeah, definitely there's some really interesting things happening up there, and yeah, I would recommend anyone to go up and have a look.
Right. Yeah, I mean, certainly incredible. Now, another thing too, when I was watching those different slides in your presentation, there's different time frames, like all the way back to the 40s or 50s, I think, maybe even before that. And I was hoping you could tell us about the first well-documented case of the ET phenomenon.
Well, probably the most impressive person to have made these claims was George Adamski back in 1952, where he began meeting with beings that claimed to come from Venus and were very Nordic looking, kind of Northern European. And you know, there were witnesses to that first encounter that he had in Desert Springs, California. This was in November of 1952. And there were 6 witnesses who saw a craft emerge after a larger cigar-shaped vehicle flew overhead. There were some Air Force jets kind of pursuing the vehicle, and then a smaller kind of circular scout craft suddenly appeared and landed near Adamski, and one of the occupants got out, and the 6 witnesses could see it at a distance. And Adamski proceeded to have a conversation with this being who said it was from Venus, and it was very concerned with the atomic or the nuclear weapons program that was underway at the time. And since that time, there have been others. Probably the most impressive case of extraterrestrials amongst us was this case in Italy called the Friendship case that occurred from 1956 up until 1978, when a group of extraterrestrials were living amongst us, or living in an area of northern Italy, and meeting with up to 100 different witnesses, people, some of them occupying very senior positions in the Italian society. We're talking about a general in the police force, diplomats, and other kind of VIPs from other countries that were part of these meetings. And this occurred over that 22-year period, and there were quite a few shots or photographs of the flying saucers that were associated with these extraterrestrials. So there you have another case of very well documented extraterrestrials living amongst us and interacting with private citizens.
Now, you've talked about the Venus, and what I'm wondering if there's ever been anything from Mars, any claims of, I guess, call them Martians.
Well, that's an interesting one. The extraterrestrials who claim to be from these various planets who've met with people, predominantly they tend to be from a lot of planets outside of our solar system and star systems, such as Alpha Centauri, the Pleiades, Sirius, also and the Andromeda constellation, Alpha Draconis, and so forth. A few have claimed to be from our solar system. Typically, it's been Venus, the interior of Venus, or also planets or moons such as Ganymede. And there have been very few that say they've been from Mars, but there have been a few cases. But there have been more recently whistleblowers who say that they've travelled to Mars and that they have participated in secret space programs that have established bases on the surface of Mars or in the kind of slightly underground of Mars. I haven't come across anyone claiming yet that there are secret bases on Venus, so there's no way of confirming people who say that they've been contacted by Venusians who live in the interior of Venus. But certainly, as far as Mars is concerned, there've been quite a few whistleblowers who say that they've been on the surface of Mars, met with indigenous Martians or encountered them in various ways. And of course, the kind of odd sporadic case of contactees saying that they've met Martians. And I believe that Adamski was one of those, that he says he also had met a Martian on some of the craft that he was invited up to.
Yeah, and with all the different cases that you have studied, how many would you say total different types of extraterrestrial species that you've recorded?
Oh, that's a good question. What I did was I put together a fairly lengthy analysis of all of the contactee claims regarding different extraterrestrial civilizations, and I cross-referenced them, and when I found that there were at least 2 independent witnesses talking about their interaction with these extraterrestrials, I would include them in my database. And so eventually I came up with a listing of basically 20 different extraterrestrial civilizations that were interacting with humanity. Typically there were 3 or 4 witnesses, people who claimed that they have had contact with these extraterrestrials, and it seemed to be a very significant pattern. So some of these were acting in very positive ways of helping the contactees learn galactic history, learn about the cover-up on the Earth. Some of the other cases were more, let's say, kind of manipulative, where people were being abused or being abducted and maltreated in some way, and others were more neutral. But I put all of those analyses together in a book called Galactic Diplomacy, So it's those 20 different extraterrestrial civilizations are examined in depth there, and it's also a fairly lengthy article on my website. If people go to the recommended reading, they'll find that article, which deals with you know, not quite as many. I think it was about 17 or so at the time that I examined.
So if we were to look at some of the more unique species, did some of the descriptions of not only the physical characteristics but different abilities come into play? And if they did, could you describe to us some of the more? I mean, were they all human looking, or did they have different body types and eyeballs, etc.?
Well, the positive examples of contact were pretty consistent in describing human-looking extraterrestrials. Some of them were quite tall. We say 7, 8, even 9 feet. Some of them had different skin coloring. For example, one of my favorites is Alex Collier, who I got to meet a few times, and he showed me where he had his contact experiences, and so I've worked with him closely over the years. In his case, he says that he met with a group of beings from the Andromeda constellation, and that one of the beings he described as approximately 8, 9 feet, but had blue skin. It was humanoid or human-looking in every other way. He was bald, but just blue skin.
Dr. Manhattan.
Dr. Manhattan.
I don't know if you've seen that movie or not, The Watchmen. The Dr. Manhattan's the blue guy.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't watched that, but definitely that's what Alex says he described. Others have described very Nordic-looking extraterrestrials, as I mentioned, George Adamski, and even the Italian UFO case. They also describe very human-looking extraterrestrials interacting with us. And then you have the kind of reptilian-looking races. They've been described variously as draconian reptilians or indigenous reptilians to the Earth. The main difference between them is that the draconians come in very different sizes. That they have a kind of a warrior caste, which is about 8, 9 feet, very powerful, kind of humanoids, with predominantly reptilian features and brown scales and so forth. The larger ones amongst them have kind of vestigial wings, and they're about 16 feet tall, very powerful psychically. They could kind of look through you with their eyes. That's they have this powerful psychic ability. Other reptilians are kind of around 7 foot tall. They're indigenous to the Earth. They've been here for a very long time. Then there are the grey extraterrestrials. These are kind of like your classic 3 foot, 4 foot tall greys, who have the big black eyes, the very expanded skull, kind of small body but long arms, thin feet, so thin legs. And then you have another group, the praying mantis type beings. These are insectoids. They can also be very tall, 7 foot, 8 foot, and they really look like a praying mantis. They are a highly evolved extraterrestrial race. And finally, there's another group which are called the tall greys. They're about 6 feet, 7 feet tall. They look like a hybrid between the smaller 3 foot, 4 foot greys and Nordic humans. They seem to be a hybrid of those two, having characteristics of both. And they seem to be a kind of diplomatic caste of the grey species.
Now, you've mentioned a lot of different, so I'm trying to figure out if they all kind of work together, if there's a hierarchy, and the 16-foot draconian type entities are the ones that are kind of the generals and the overall archetype of the Galactic Federation that you're discussing. Could you get into detail on that?
Yeah, sure. There seems to be, as far as the extraterrestrials who are directly interacting with humanity, there seems to be 2 major groupings. One is the kind of human-looking extraterrestrials who tend to be very positive. They are described as belonging to some different organizations. One, typically it's called, say, the Confederation of Planets. Another version is called the Alliance of Planets. And they just, while they cooperate in many ways, they have very different political philosophies. The way in which I would describe it would be kind of like the way in which the United States differs from, say, Northern European nations when it comes to kind of like trouble spots around the planet. So, like in cases where there's kind of like a breakdown of society, the United States and Britain tends to be more interventionist and get involved, whereas kind of Northern European countries tend to be more non-interventionist and want to be kind of more involved in peacekeeping operations to help rebuild a society. So it seems that these human-looking extraterrestrials tend to fit into those different kind of political alliances, one being more interventionist than the other. The other broad grouping involves these kind of non-human looking extraterrestrial groups that I mentioned. The Draconians definitely are the kind of high up there in terms of being the leaders of that. In terms of being the generals, these 16-foot tall Draconians tend to be in command. But also the praying mantis beings tend to have a lot of influence as well from behind the scenes.
Now, Betty and Barney Hill, one of the more famous cases of abduction, they even had physical evidence of some type of extraterrestrial substance on their clothes or whatever. I had an opportunity to speak to their niece, Kathleen Martin, or great niece, super nice gal. She's she works with MUFON. She's got a really cool position with them. And, she talked about how they saw this mantis type ET, and it was from I think the Zeta Reticuli constellation. Do you have any verification on that? Have you found other parallels to that also?
Yes, as you mentioned, that was the first kind of abduction case that came to the attention of researchers back in 1961, as I recall. Having done a kind of a little bit of research into that, it seems that there were kind of mixed accounts as to who they met. It seemed that at one point it was a kind of a grey-looking extraterrestrial race, and then there were mention of kind of human-looking extraterrestrials. So I am not convinced in that case that it's quite clear exactly who it was that they were meeting, what grouping. I remember, for example, that Barney Hill said something about some of that the extraterrestrials they met wore these black leather jackets and looked like Nazis, which at the time many researchers thought was ridiculous. But given my more recent research, I think that in fact that may have been probably an accurate description of what they were meeting, and maybe at that time these kind of space Nazis were cooperating with other extraterrestrial races such as the Greys.
Yeah, if we could jump into that for a second, because there's a lot of speculation that the Nazis were, there were certain branches of that Reich that would summon up different interstellar entities for technologies. The Thule Society is one that comes to mind, and there's speculation that the Nazis took off to Antarctica and got some ET tech. What research, if you've done any research on that subject, have you found some pretty cool parallels and information in regards to that?
Well, definitely, yes. In fact, I'm working on a case right now where this new whistleblower who worked with the US Navy during the war actually was part of the debriefings of these Navy spies that were coming back to the United States to debrief their superiors about the Nazi technology programs that they had been embedded into during the war years. And what these spies revealed was that the Nazis had developed highly advanced spacecraft using a variety of propulsion systems, some of which were anti-gravity propulsion, and that the Nazis had been successful in even flying off a planet, and that the Nazis began cooperating with a group of extraterrestrials called the Draconians. As I mentioned earlier, these are a leading group of kind of more negatively involved or oriented extraterrestrials, and so the Nazis became heavily involved with these reptilians who essentially gave the Nazis or helped the Nazis develop some of their technologies and to develop bases in remote locations such as Antarctica and South America, where the Nazis continued the development of their spacecraft using these advanced propulsion systems even after the war had finished. So, of course, you have Admiral Byrd's Operation High Jump in 1946-47, which really was an attempt to find the Nazi bases and either take them over or destroy them. But Byrd's expedition was basically very badly beaten back by fleets of flying saucers that were under the control of the Nazis, who during the war years were able to really take their Antarctic bases to a very high level in terms of having developed many operational spacecraft. And so right throughout the 50s and the 60s, the Nazis expanded their space program out of Antarctica, and over the years kind of got to infiltrate the US military-industrial complex. But in the meantime, were really expanding through their cooperation with these reptilians. And so, yes, it's very possible that some of the contactee cases may in fact have involved these Nazis that were essentially kind of abducting humans in a program oriented to fulfill whatever agenda they had.
Now, also, you've had obviously a ton of time to gather multitudes of different outlets for information. And, what are some other avenues that you've gathered information that not everybody could just go on to Google and punch it in the computer?
Well, the best information is from the witnesses themselves who have been there. So getting their kind of first-hand testimony is always important. And so that's typically what I do, is to interview these people who have been involved in some of these programs and get their first-hand testimony, and then get from them whatever documents they have that substantiate their testimonies. In some cases, they don't have any documents. That's some of the secret space program and the contactees. The people involved in these typically don't have any documents pertaining to their experiences that can help substantiate them. But in some cases, people do have documents. So in those cases, I look, I examine the documents, examine what the documents tell us about this person's claims. Do the documents substantiate what the person is claiming? Or not. Then you look at the kind of backgrounds of these people. Are they doing it because they want to basically get some kind of public fame, or are they doing it because they're genuinely wanting to reveal the truth? And then finally, I do the kind of political analysis, which is to cross-reference the claims of different whistleblowers and just kind of ensure that there's a consistency across these claims. So if one person says that they were taken up to the moon at a secret base up there that was part of a secret space program, that is consistent with, say, another whistleblower who's also gone through a similar experience. So I do that kind of cross comparative analysis as well.
Now, how many people have you talked to that claim to have been abducted or seen a UFO, and you interview them and you find out they're full of crap?
There are a few people that I've interviewed or who I've studied that I simply discontinue the case. And typically that's because, my feeling is that, there's some deception, that they're not telling the truth, or that they're being manipulated. I rarely find anyone coming up to me and consciously lying. That's kind of rare. What is more common is that people are part of a program, that they're an asset, and that they're being mind controlled to come to you with information that's kind of full of red herrings or disinformation to kind of distract you. And that's something that I do occasionally encounter, and in those cases I eventually kind of drop the case, or simply just don't acknowledge that person. I don't follow up with that person.
If we could get into that for a second, I find that fascinating. So you say that there's actually been cases where people have came to you and they consciously? Do they really think that they've been abducted, and then you find out that they haven't? Or because you're saying mind control, like an asset. So I'm trying to piece that together.
Well, what I've found consistently is that people who get in touch with me, that they appear to be very sincere with their claims. So they sound as though this is something that really happened to them, and so then I kind of like have to dig in to those claims, and then I find that some of it just doesn't match up, that it's not credible, and I get the kind of sense when I look at those cases that it's because of some mind control factor. And typically this is what the person themselves would acknowledge, that they will tell me that they were abducted, and that the military were involved, and that they were subjected to some kind of mind control. And when that happens, you can never be sure how much of the information they reveal to you is accurate, as opposed to something that's been simply implanted into their heads. So it's like really just having a good knowledge base to be able to compare what a witness is revealing with what you've encountered in the past, to see if there are any problems with their testimony. And if there are problems, then then I found that it's better just not to proceed with that case.
Have you seen a UFO besides the time you were with James, or ever had some type of contact with an ET firsthand?
I've seen other UFOs kind of similar to what I saw up at Mount Adams. I've been to other kind of retreat locations where there have been contactees similar to James who have had experiences. And so I've been to, for example, to Bolivia, where I saw things happen there. I've been to Mount Shasta, again, similar things with another contactee. I've seen things here in Hawaii as well, kind of lights, but it's always been these distant lights that are very high altitudes. We're talking 40, 50,000 feet or more. So definitely nothing definitive, nothing that, you look at that and you can say with 100% certainty, that's an extraterrestrial craft. They're things that, as I said, kind of pulse and that look like they might be extraterrestrial craft, but as I said, you can't be 100% conclusive.
Now, with so much publicity, and when I say, so many opportunities to video record something with your cell phone, it's pretty easy to pick something up in the sky nowadays if you just look up there, if there's actually something there. So there's a lot of stuff on YouTube and LiveLink, and you can Google things and look on the web for UFO video footage, and I've seen some pretty cool stuff. But there's always that maybe. There's never been something that's came out that's made me say, wow, that is without a shadow of a doubt an extraterrestrial. I wonder what force keeps that from the public. I mean, because whatever it is, it's at a global scale. So with the research you've done, Micheal, who do you think keeps all of that stuff? Because somebody's got to get it once in a while. I mean, somebody's got to pick up one of those gems on their cell phone, and then all of a sudden they get a visit by somebody or something, and then, poof, it's gone. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I know that psychological warfare has been a very important part of the cover-up since the early 1950s, and that all types of media have been manipulated to try and basically sow a lot of confusion when it comes to the topic of UFOs. And I know that there have been many really clear looking UFOs that have made their way to YouTube in the form of people claiming that they saw these UFOs, and they turn out to be CGI hoaxes. Now, I think that some of that, or maybe a lot of that, is probably because it is part of a kind of psychological warfare program to kind of like just discredit any serious study of the phenomenon by just kind of flooding the public with these hoaxed UFO cases. In the early days, in the 1940s and 50s, when you didn't have programs such as Adobe Photoshop or CGI special effect programs, it was much harder to kind of manipulate photos. And so some of those older photos and video going back to the 50s and 60s, they're probably even now still the most impressive photos that concern UFOs and extraterrestrial life. As far as what kind of gets uploaded to YouTube by the general public, I tend to stay well clear of that, because simply speaking, I'm not an image analyst. I'm not a specialist in being able to kind of like analyze CGI manipulation, and so it takes a lot of time to research one of these cases. So I much prefer to put my energy into sources that I think are more credible. So, for example, I've in my website I've done quite a large number of articles looking at NASA images from the International Space Station, or from the Curiosity rover, or from the SOHO satellites that are orbiting the sun, which show a phenomenon. Because at least with those sources, you can't have any hoaxing. You don't have anyone at NASA trying to manipulate the public into believing that there's some sort of life form on Mars, or that there's a kind of a spacecraft visiting the International Space Station. So those are cases that I think are much more legitimate, and some of them are pretty compelling. There was one in January of 2014 which showed a kind of a dart-shaped craft docked with the International Space Station. And that's one of my favorites, because it's so clear that this is something docked with the International Space Station, but NASA never really tried to explain it, or NASA hasn't explained it even to this day. But it's a very clear case, I think, of a spacecraft docking with the ISS. Then you have some other kind of NASA images, like there's the famous STS-48 film footage of a UFO leaving the Earth's orbit, and then some kind of directed energy weapon is focused on it from the Earth, and then this kind of UFO makes a right angle turn. So that's a very clear demonstration by the live streaming out of that was the space shuttle's camera system, showing a UFO being targeted by an Earth-based directed energy system that had to take evasive action.
I do remember this video that I saw last year of it was your typical flying disc UFO, and there was like this window, and in the cockpit you could see it looked like it looked kind of like these two gray type aliens bouncing around in there. Have you seen that video footage? You know what I'm referring to?
I'm not sure if that's...
It was in like Turkey, or not Turkey, or
okay.
It was a professor somewhere in Europe or the Middle East approximately.
Yes, I know the one. That's Turkey. Yes, I've actually spent a little time kind of looking through that case, and I found that to be very compelling. Very credible people have been involved in analysing that Turkey UFO case, and I know one of my colleagues, Dr. Roger Lear, was involved in that case, as well as a Turkish UFO researcher that I'm very familiar with. And so yes, that's one case that I think is very credible, showing what appears to be some one or two extraterrestrials in the cockpit of some flying saucer craft.
I mean, that one's almost too good to be true. If it is legit, I find that one fascinating. And there's so much speculation about where the Greys actually come from, if they're just clones, if they're biosuits, if they're evolved humans for millions of years from now, that their bodies got frail and their heads got really big because they were more of a sponge for knowledge. And that's kind of what James says about the Greys, is they don't really care much about, I guess you could say, imagination anymore. It's more just knowledge and obtaining information, kind of like the Borg, I guess, plugging it into the mainframe. So, I mean, do you think that the Greys and these reptilians are, you talk about some of them being from Earth, but you think some of them come from other planets, or do you believe in interdimensional type entities? I mean, where has your research led you?
Well, I think the whole idea of different dimensions is an important one to consider. Mainstream scientists actually are now accepting that there could be as many as 11 different dimensions. And I know with Micheal Salla, with string theory, that's compatible with this idea that there can be 11 different dimensions, and I think that's probably very close to the mark, because some of these extraterrestrial craft don't appear to be coming from a location in space. when they just suddenly materialize. So that would suggest that they're kind of coming through a different dimension or a different time portal, which would explain why it is that, 1 second they're there and another second they're gone. So I think that there is such a thing as interdimensional travel, as well as temporal travel, that is time travel, as well, of course, as the kind of more conventional space travel that we're all familiar with, where different types of propulsion, take you from one point in space-time to another point in space-time.
Yeah, folding those dimensions and just cutting through the center of it. Now, the influence that ETs have in our everyday life, politics, the Department of Defense, education, media, entertainment, sports. What have you discovered with the possibility of some off-Earth race controlling the scenes, behind the scenes, kind of like a puppet master?
I think that there is a lot of kind of control and manipulation of the Earth. I don't know whether you need to kind of like point to some sort of extraterrestrial influence, because we have a lot of very powerful secret societies on Earth, and that these societies go back thousands of years, and they tend to use kind of like occult forces, things such as black magic, satanic rituals, and so forth, that they use to kind of like manipulate people and to exert control over the population. I think that in our kind of modern day and age, it's very clear that, at least in the United States, that we really live in a corporatocracy. The corporations really run the United States, and that these corporations in themselves, there have been studies done, and that these studies show that out of the many thousands or tens of thousands of major corporations around the planet, ultimate control of these corporations comes down to kind of like less than 100 families. And I think that's where you get the idea of the Illuminati, the cabal. These are people with kind of like ancient bloodlines, or come from these kind of like aristocratic families, and that they have great wealth, great influence, and they're associated with these secret societies. What's very significant is that they do ally themselves with extraterrestrial groups, some of the more negative extraterrestrial groups that I was mentioning earlier, like the reptilians, or in particular the draconians, and some of these insectoid races. And so you do have that kind of interlocking web of influences. But certainly, yes, there are off-world civilizations that do play a role in the overt control and manipulation of planet Earth. Now, whether it's like a kind of like, if you think of the Earth as a prison planet, and you think of the cabal as kind of like the jailers, the warden, if you like, then the off-world extraterrestrials are kind of like the owners of the jail, if you like.
Yeah, the owners of the jail. It does seem more and more like this planet, as amazing and beautiful as it is, could turn into a prison-type planet with the technologies that are available, depending on who gets access to the computer screen and the buttons to push. Imagine a microchip society where some very unhappy individual or individuals decided to, let's just wipe out 95% of the dissidents and start over. But there's a lot of speculation out there, Michael, that there's this shape-shifting reptilian race that is in politics and, like you say, many of the aristocratic bloodlines. Do you think that there's some truth there, or do you feel that it's more, the people that are at the very top levels are fully human, but they're being influenced, maybe telepathically or psychically or in some type of blackmail or magic rituals from these off-world entities?
I think it tends to be more of the latter. Now, I know David Icke's books are very popular in terms of like the British royals and other kind of leading personalities are really reptilian shapeshifters. I don't agree with that. I think what's really going on is that we do have reptilians that kind of interact with humanity. and that live amongst us, but that they use technology and mind control to hide themselves. So they tend to be more behind the scenes. I don't think any major public figure is a reptilian shapeshifter. Some of them may have reptilian DNA in them, so that's certainly true. But I think kind of David Icke's idea of them having kind of like enough reptilian DNA that they can kind of like consciously shapeshift is probably not correct, but I think he's partially correct in that there very likely is some kind of technology that these reptilians use to hide themselves, but I don't think that that technology would work in a public arena. Like someone like Queen Elizabeth or Prince Charles. These are very highly public people. With cameras on them all the time, and so if they were reptilian shapeshifters who could only hold that form for a certain only hold the human form for a certain amount of time before they had to kind of shapeshift back, then I think they would have been caught out a long time ago. I think what's more likely is that you have a lot of kind of elite people in the cabal, the ruling families, who stay behind the scenes, who might look human but possess technology that really disguises that they are in fact reptilians. And I think that's probably very widespread, that we probably have many hundreds of thousands, if millions of reptilians live amongst us using these technologies and mind control to basically hide.
They live. Remember that movie?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And I certainly, that's definitely a possibility. If you think about it, we're only seeing, most people, even with really good eyesight, pick up about 0.01% of the electromagnetic light spectrum, and then their brain filters out another 50% of what that data is being processed. So there's a lot of stuff out there that our physical eyes don't pick up. And, there's even a new telescope, a new lens that was put in a telescope. I'm going to have to look through my notes and find the name of it. It's a new, you can Google new telescope that sees things that your physical eyes don't see. But it's, they've been putting this telescope, pointing it towards areas of like military areas and stuff like that. And it's picking up a lot of like weird stuff, there's something there, but nobody else is seeing it but this lens. So makes you wonder what kind of interstellar stuff could be popping in and out of these different dimensions, and you get into the whole quantum physics and quantum entanglements. So it's very fascinating indeed. And do you think, Michael, that there are some connections with the Nephilim, and also the fallen angels talked about in the Book of Enoch?
Well, yeah, that's very interesting, Rex. The references to the Nephilim in the Book of Enoch, and in Genesis as well, that ancient humans societies were aware of extraterrestrials. Well, they called them gods or angels, fallen angels. They use those restrictive terms, but today we would describe them as extraterrestrials, because they were basically non-humans, or they were beings using technology that originated off planet. And yes, these Nephilim interacted with human society, and they basically formed the ruling elite. And it's not just the Book of Enoch. There's the King's List from Sumeria, and also Egypt. Manetho came up with the history of Egypt that it was prior to the 30 Egyptian dynasties, where he talked about the gods and the demigods. And these were very powerful beings that had advanced technologies. And certainly, I think we could say that these were extraterrestrial visitors who had established colonies on the Earth, had probably, I think we can be pretty confident that they actually were genetically interacting with humanity, either through biological experiments or through kind of interbreeding, that they were creating some kind of human extraterrestrial hybrids. And this has been one of the things that I've come across again and again in my research, is the whole idea of kind of human extraterrestrial hybrids. This is not just a modern phenomenon, of course, with the abduction phenomenon. We talked about Betty and Barney Hill, but there are many others that talk about greys conducting these biological experiments to create hybrids. There's a colleague, Dr. David Jacobs from Temple University in Pennsylvania, who's convinced that the Greys are basically conducting this long-term hybridization program to create these hybrids that will eventually supplant humanity on the surface of the planet. I think that this has been going on for many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. Some of the contactees and the whistleblowers that I've come across refer to 22 different hybridization experiments that have been conducted over an extended period of time, and I think that's pretty consistent with my own analysis. You know, when I talked earlier about the 20 different extraterrestrial races that have been interacting with humanity, the bulk of those races often involved in some kind of a hybridization experiment with humanity. So I think we probably can be reasonably confident that throughout human history that, you know, somewhere in that range of around 20 different extraterrestrial civilizations have been genetically interacting with humanity to create all of the major racial groups on the surface.
You totally just read my mind, because the question that I was going to ask you, and you answered it for me, thank you, was, do you think that extraterrestrials have had an influence in our physical creation? So, but let me go back even a step further. Do you think that they were our original creators? And I don't mean in spirit essence, but in physical essence, like test tube type stuff.
Yes, well, you know, that kind of gets into a theological issue. Is like, well, you know, if the first humans were, how were the first humans created? Were they created by kind of extraterrestrials that came here and kind of like, left some of their own progeny, or kind of interacted with some of the early hominid species? Well, then, who created the extraterrestrials? So you can kind of go back and back in a kind of infinite kind of loop in terms of finding out, who created who. But I think there's another plausible theory, and this comes from a researcher, Micheal Salla, and he's come up with this theory called devolution. And I think there's something to that theory where he basically says that what really happened is that there was a kind of devolution from some kind of spiritual realm, higher dimensions, if you like, where that higher consciousness kind of like let's just say moved into our material plane and created for itself a material body. So it's kind of like the idea of movies like Avatar, where you kind of get this, where you can move consciousness across the dimensions into another physical body, or to kind of manifest the body. I think that we probably the very first humans, or the very first extraterrestrials, however you want to begin, probably were created in that manner, where they were these kind of high dimensional beings that just materialized in a particular physical environment and manufactured a physical body out of that local environment, and then began to interact and evolve over the eons.
Devolution. It's fascinating, and I've often wondered, the more we get into technology, it's great to be able to go onto Google and research all this information and have it right on your fingertips, but what does that really do to the construction and makeup of your brain when you look at the way your synapses shoot and everything's created and put together in there with your thoughts, etc.? So it's almost like it's a catch-22, and there needs to be some type of balance. You see footage of monks out in Tibet and high mountainous areas where the weather's 30 below, and they're outside in robes, and they're sitting down, and they're controlling their body temperature to the point where the snow around them is melting, and the people that are recording it with giant fur coats on are shaking with gloves. It's just amazing that, that kind of stuff was probably a lot more accessible thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago via thought and mind, but because we are kind of devolving spiritually, it's definitely for another topic. And I'm glad you brought up Micheal Salla, because he's a great guy, and we've had him on our show here before. Now, I know that we've gone an hour, and we talked about you maybe going a little bit longer. Do you feel okay going a little bit longer, or do you want to call it a night?
Yeah, let's do a little bit longer, half an hour.
Fantastic. Yeah, I really appreciate it because you've got so much just awesome information. I really appreciate you letting me pick your brain here, and the audience is just enthralled with this information that you're bringing to the table. Now, if we could also possibly jump into your Kennedy book on disclosure and the most recent work that you came out with, the secret space program, for the last 30 minutes that we have. Now, the media today is really, in my opinion, conditioning the masses to be frightened and scared to hell out of, from aliens. Oh my gosh, you've got Cloverfield, Independence Day, the new Independence Day that's coming out. The majority of the movies out now portray extraterrestrials as this violent race of entities that want to just destroy Earth and blow everything up. And I think all the way back into the 80s and the late 70s. I'm 38, so I didn't have a chance to watch much when I was 1, 2, and 3 years old, but I do remember Star Wars. And it seemed like the extraterrestrial presence was pretty cool. You've got E.T. and Alf, and a lot of the sitcoms and shows were portraying the extraterrestrial presence as cool, as happy, and good people. And now it's like, oh, they're going to kill you, they're going to shoot you with a laser beam, they're going to blow everybody up, and they're going to eat you next. So why do you think the media is doing that?
I think there's definitely a psychological conditioning that's been going on for a long time. I know that one of the things that would make it a lot easier for those that have been running these secret space programs, that have been kind of managing the extraterrestrial projects behind the scene, is that if the day comes when a lot of this has to be disclosed, that it's done in a way that maintains much of the national security apparatus. So in other words, people will say that this is these beings are very dangerous, and that it's good that the military intelligence community is looking after it, and because so much of the military intelligence community is opaque in the way it operates, then basically it would be more or less giving the military intelligence community carte blanche in managing the kind of extraterrestrial issues that would be arising. And so I think that's probably a major reason why people are being very heavily conditioned to believe that extraterrestrials are a threat, because all you need to do is not even kind of like convince people that they are a dire threat to humanity, but at the very least present them as an enigma, as something that could turn on you in a way that could lead to very unhealthy results. And so then we would want the military intelligence community to play an important role in managing that presence. We would want the military industrial complex to kind of like build more powerful spacecraft and weapon system in case we needed that. So basically it would, this kind of conditioning, this psychological conditioning to get us to buy into extraterrestrials are dangerous, enigmatic, and kind of capable of eating us, it really does play into this whole military industrial complex, maintaining overall control and maintaining financial spending, black budget spending on these projects.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Keep the masses scared, and then they're not going to care if you're spending trillions of dollars on black budget defense type stuff. Definitely makes sense. So let's get into the book, Kennedy's Last Stand, Eisenhower, UFOs, MJ-12, and JFK's assassination. What did you compile together in that book?
Basically, what I found was that President Kennedy was trying to assert presidential authority over classified UFO files. Kennedy was aware of secret space programs. He was aware of extraterrestrial intelligence because during the 1940s, in fact, in 1945, for example, Kennedy traveled to Germany as a guest of the then Secretary of Navy, James Forrestal. In 1945, Forrestal was there in July to attend the Potsdam meeting where President Truman basically traveled and gave the go-ahead for Operation Paperclip. And what Operation Paperclip found was that many of the Nazi flying saucer programs had been successful, and that many of these craft had been built through the German Kriegsmarine, which is their navy. And so the US Navy was very interested in what the Germans were doing. They wanted to replicate those technologies. And Kennedy was there watching all of this and actually got to see these technologies at first hand and actually wrote a book about it. Or at least he wrote a diary. He recorded what some of the things that he had seen, the unclassified versions of what he had seen in his diaries, and these were posthumously published in a book called Prelude to Leadership. And so what that book basically helps substantiate is that Kennedy was very aware of advanced German technologies, and that right throughout the 40s and 50s, these advanced German technologies were being developed in various US facilities, and that various spacecraft, anti-gravity vehicles, programs involving extraterrestrial life were moving forward, and that during the 1950s, ultimate authority over these programs slipped out of the hands of the executive branch of government. And so President Eisenhower was very disturbed over the fact that he no longer exercised direct authority over these types of extraterrestrial related programs. And so when Kennedy came to power, Eisenhower basically warned Kennedy that he really needed to reassert presidential authority over these programs, or things would not be good for the future. And I think that's why Kennedy was ultimately assassinated, because he was on the verge of succeeding in his efforts in establishing presidential authority over classified UFO files and the secret space programs.
There's other things out there that I've heard too. He was going to try and create a gold-backed currency again, so he was taken out. And I have heard the theory that you're discussing also. So that's interesting. I'd definitely like to read that book. Is it available on Amazon, or do you go directly to your website to purchase it?
You can do both. Amazon is probably the easiest for most people. And yes, but if you want an autographed copy, that people can just come to my website.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely the way to go then. Just go to your website, exopolitics.org, folks. Now, also, insiders reveal secret space programs and extraterrestrial alliances. I mean, that's in and of itself a fascinating topic, and I'm sure we could put together 4 podcasts on that. But, if you could kind of condense that in 10 minutes or so and give our listeners a really good glimpse and taste into that material, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. Well, in that book, what I do is really investigate the claims of Corey Goode, who is a whistleblower who came forward in early 2015 or late 2014 when he did his first audio interviews. But basically, he came up with a remarkable story about being involved in a secret space program for a 20-year period from 1987 to 2007, and that after he completed his 20-year service, that he was age regressed and sent back in time to when he basically began that service in 1987. So basically, he said that in that period, 1987 to 2007, he lived that 20-year period twice, which sounds very bizarre. But the thing was that he wasn't the first person to say that. There was another whistleblower by the name of Michael Ralph, who back in the year 2000 came out with a book called The Mars Record, and he said something very similar, that he was recruited into a secret space program back in 1976, and after serving for 20 years, then he was age regressed and sent back in time back to 1976. And there was a third whistleblower, Randy Kramer, saying the same thing, that this had happened to him. So when I looked at these different whistleblower accounts and found that there was this pattern, I realized that there was something really going on here that was worth examining. So then I began to look very closely at Corey Goode's claims about the origins of these secret space programs. He identified 5 different space programs, and basically the first one began during the Nazi era, and we talked a little bit about that earlier with the what the Nazis were doing with advanced aerospace technologies and agreements with reptilians. That Corey Goode described that same phase, and basically he said that this was the origin of one of the secret space programs that he called the Dark Fleet. Now, while that was happening, especially after the Second World War, the US Navy played the lead role in establishing a US secret space program. And eventually that became operational in the 1980s. Now, the interesting thing here for the readers to pay attention to is you have the Nazis in the 1940s developing anti-gravity spacecraft and developing fleets of these spacecraft in the 40s and 50s, and the United States Navy was able to do it in the 1980s. So that's a kind of 40-year difference, and it's like, well, why was there such a gap? If the Nazis had succeeded in the 40s, why didn't the US kind of follow soon after? And according to my research, was that basically the US military-industrial complex had been infiltrated by the Nazis, and that the Nazis basically slowed down through sabotage and manipulation and other forms of control the development of a wholly US space program. So the US space program was called Solar Warden. That became operational in the 1980s. And then the corporations that helped in the development of those battle fleets that were built for the US Navy, these corporations eventually established their own separate space program that was under the authority of the Majestic 12 group, which was the group that was running the extraterrestrial programs, running the secret space programs, and basically were responsible for the Kennedy assassination. This Majestic 12 program basically wanted to internationalize the space program. They wanted to kind of go outside of the US Constitution and basically sideline the US Navy and the program that it was created. So you had this third program, and according to Corey Goode, this was called the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate. And this very quickly became a very powerful space program, because the corporations were the entities that were building the spacecraft that were eventually being purchased by the US Navy as part of the Solar Warden program. So those same corporations built these same craft, but even more evolved versions later for this kind of Majestic 12 organization that worked very closely with US secret societies and a global cabal of corporations and secret societies that were all interlinked through these historic bloodlines. So that's the third secret space program, and that became operational in the late 1980s. And then in the early 1990s, there was a fourth secret space program called the Galactic League, the Global Galactic League of Nations, according to Corey Goode, and and I examined these claims in terms of the end of the Cold War, what Ronald Reagan was doing in giving speeches, public speeches, basically saying that there was an extraterrestrial threat and that humanity needed to come together to deal with this extraterrestrial threat. And I believe that that is why this Global Galactic League of Nations was allowed to go forward, because there had been agreements reached at the United Nations for all the major nations to cooperate in building this secret space fleet. And one of the conditions for doing that would be to end the Cold War. And that was something that I examined as very plausible, given the conditions that led to the end of the Cold War and the events. So that Corey Goode's theory there, or his claim, I felt was very consistent with geopolitical events as they occurred in the 1980s and 90s with the end of the Cold War. And then finally, you have this fifth secret space program that Corey Goode describes as special access programs. And this basically is a number of unacknowledged special access programs in the United States and other countries that are kind of working at a much smaller level, doing their own thing as far as advanced technologies that are relevant to the secret space program. So this fifth program is really a rubric of a lot of rogue entities that do all sorts of things. And so I gave examples in the book about how these rogue entities would operate. For example, the development of directed energy weapons that could be deployed from these space stations that are in permanent orbit around the Earth, and that there was good evidence that the 9/11 towers, the collapse of those, was due to these directed energy weapons being basically used to pump the trade centers. And so that was something that could help explain what happened. It wasn't the whole picture, but I think it was part of the kind of events leading to 9/11. So Goode kind of like described these 5 different space programs that kind of like were in existence during his service from 1987 to 2007. And then Good basically said that in 2011 there was a new actor or a new grouping of extraterrestrials coming into our solar system, which Good met. He met the representatives of these beings, and he called them the Sphere Being Alliance. That's the term that the secret space programs called these beings, and they had very powerful technologies. They had these enormous spheres, kind of planet-sized spheres, some of them as large as Jupiter, that were positioned in strategic points around the solar system, and that sometime around 2014, 2015, around
You
our
know what,
solar system
Michael?
and
Michael,
also around the planet.
can we
Yes.
stop real quick because something, I don't know what happened, man, but your voice just completely. We went to as far as you were talking about these planet-sized spheres that have been strategically placed in the solar system by these this maybe Type 2 civilization or something that you're referring to, and then all of a sudden there was nothing. So could we continue where you left off in regards to the planet-sized spheres as big as Jupiter?
Sure. Well, so these planet-sized spheres as big as Jupiter suddenly began appearing after 2011, and they began to locate themselves at strategic points around our solar system and even around our planet. And eventually what happened was that in 2014, 2015, they created a frequency grid, kind of like a quarantine, if you like, of our entire solar system and our planet. And they did this. There were two primary reasons that Corey identified. One was that they were basically trying to filter these incoming cosmic energies that were associated with the kind of end times scenario with our planet, and that they wanted to ensure that those incoming cosmic energies didn't lead to kind of catastrophe on the Earth or lead to our sun suddenly going into some hyperactive phase that would extinguish life or imperil life on the planet Earth. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason was that they basically wanted to prevent different extraterrestrial races and also the different space programs that had been established on Earth from leaving our solar system or entering into our solar system, because this Sphere Being Alliance, and I'm glad you used the term, being a Type 2 or Type 3 civilization, because that seems to be exactly what they were, that these were really a Type 3 civilization, and that they were establishing this kind of solar system-wide quarantine because they said that all of the Type 1 and Type 2 extraterrestrial civilizations that previously had been interacting with humanity, now they had to go through this kind of earth changes, this kind of infusion of cosmic energies that would raise the frequency of everything that was happening on the Earth. And so Corey Good described that process, and he described a range of negotiations that then subsequently happened as the different space programs, as the different extraterrestrial alliances all began to talk about, well, how they could manage themselves in this new scenario with this kind of Type 3 civilization suddenly establishing a solar system-wide quarantine and a planetary quarantine as well, because this is one of the things that they did was they came in and they basically said, okay, the Earth up until now has been controlled by these ruling elites, the Cabal, the Illuminati, working with the Draconian Federation Alliance. So we're going to kind of like even level the playing field. We're going to enable the Solar Warden program to have more powerful technologies, and we'll work with them so that they could kind of like establish a level playing field and create a kind of cold peace, if you like, so that the different actors could negotiate and work out some kind of long-term solution as everyone faced this kind of scenario of incoming cosmic energies. And ultimately, according to Corey, this would culminate in some kind of disclosure event, such as thousands of documents being released into the public arena, substantiating extraterrestrial visitation and also the existence of these secret space programs. And that after this disclosure event, then there would be something like this kind of end times ascension event that different groups have been talking about for decades now.
Do you believe in Nibiru?
That's very interesting. I think that there are many large planets in the Kuiper Belt that have kind of long-term um, orbits of around our solar system. Um, if that's a very interesting question, given what Corey has very recently revealed, that Zecharia Sitchin, that much of his information was actually contrived. That the whole idea of Nibiru being a populated planet that had these that had the kind of Anunnaki with superior technologies who came to the Earth and basically bioengineered humanity 400,000 years ago, that a lot of that was contrived because the Cabal, the Illuminati, wanted to infiltrate human society with that idea of extraterrestrial creators because they have an agenda to create a new global religion. So yes, at the moment I am probably more in the skeptical camp of a Nibiru along the lines of what Zecharia Sitchin has described, but I certainly think that there are probably many other large planetary bodies out in the Kuiper Belt, and some of them might be kind of like super Earths.
Yeah, absolutely. It just certainly seems like there's been I'm neutral when it comes to Nibiru and Planet X. I've had some really good guests on the show that have shown some really cool photos. It definitely looks like there's some type of planet or dwarf star next to our own, but I don't know. So it's good to hear an alternative opinion on that. And I've never heard the theory about the Jupiter-sized planets. I have heard the possibility of Earth being under some type of galactic quarantine, as well as the solar system, just because of, like you said, the dark cabal that seems to pull the majority of the strings for most people that have been assimilated by the Borg. They seem to have a very dark presence to them. And, can we prove that? No, but it certainly is very interesting. And man, I wouldn't doubt it. It's fascinating. So I got to tell you, Michael, it's been just a real pleasure to speak with you. I mean, you are an encyclopedia of knowledge, and your website is fantastic, exopolitics.org. Definitely, folks and people that have had an opportunity to listen to this broadcast, make sure to go to his website and pick up one of his books because, man, just a ton of information. What's next for you, Michael?
Well, at the moment, I'm doing some research on this new secret space program, Whistleblower, and I've done some interviews with him. So I'm now kind of in the process of doing some editing of the videos and his testimony, and kind of looking at some of his claims in following through with the documents that he's presented. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of work involved in getting his kind of testimony more out there and looking at more whistleblowers as they come forward to reveal what they know about these secret space programs. So I just want to thank you, Rex, for having me on your show, and it sounds as though the Leak Project is doing really great work in putting out very helpful information to your audience to help lift up consciousness, and I really appreciate everything you do to kind of like spread the word. So thank you.
Absolutely, and thank you. We'll definitely stay in touch, and may the force be with you, my friend.
Thank you. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. We have special guest, Dr. Micheal Salla, a pioneer in the development of exopolitics, the political study of key actors, institutions, and processes associated with extraterrestrial life. His interest in exopolitics evolved out of his investigation of the source of international conflict and its relationship to an extraterrestrial presence that is not acknowledged to the general public, elected officials, or even senior military officials. Internationally renowned scholar in politics, conflict resolution, author, researcher, lecturer, and key figure for the disclosure movement, Dr. Salla has published several groundbreaking books and articles discussing exopolitics, implications of the extraterrestrial presence, exposing U.S. government policies on extraterrestrial life, galactic diplomacy, getting to yes with E.T., Kennedy's last stand, Eisenhower, UFOs, MJ-12, and JFK's assassination, and his most recent work, Insiders Reveal Secret Space Programs and Extraterrestrial Alliances. In that book, he analyzes whistleblower testimonies revealing the extent of classified space programs and extraterrestrial diplomacy. Check out Dr. Salla's work at www.exopolitics.org. Michael, thank you so much for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. How's it going?
Thanks, Rex. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you. I've been following your work now for some time. You've been a real key figure in the disclosure movement now for years, and you certainly have led a very fascinating life. Now, I gave a pretty good introduction about the work that you do and the books that you've authored, but for those that haven't had an opportunity to learn about you before and follow your work, just give us a quick idea on who you are and essentially how you became such an expert in these topics.
Sure, Rex. I was a professor of international politics with a specialty in international conflict. And in 2001, when I held a full-time appointment at American University in Washington, D.C., I watched the Disclosure Project press conference that had been organized by Dr. Stephen Greer, where there were 21 whistleblowers revealing what they knew about a cover-up of extraterrestrial life. And I can honestly say that it really changed my life. Up until that time, I was a pretty conventional scholar of international politics. And once I watched that video and listened to those whistleblowers, I realized that this was a very real phenomenon, and that there were very credible people who were having experiences about this cover-up, and it of course affected the way in which international politics was being conducted. And so for me, I just saw this as a natural evolution from studying politics at an international level to studying politics at a planetary, interplanetary level, if you like.
Sure, you took it a step further. That's incredible. And one of the things that I was watching a video of a presentation that you put together, I think it was in 2014, and you were showing different slides and case studies of people that claim they were our space brothers or ETs, and they looked totally human, and they acted like us, they sounded like us. But one in particular that really caught my eye was Valiant Thor. And I was hoping you could talk to us about a few of those really cool claims, and then we could segue from there.
Sure. Well, this has been one of those issues that has been a part of the extraterrestrial phenomenon for some years. I think the person that brought that issue, with a lot of kind of weight into the disclosure movement was a Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean, who worked with NATO headquarters, and he says that back in 1964, he went into a secure location in the supreme headquarters of NATO that was at the time based in Paris, and he says he saw a report called The Assessment. And he says that in the assessment, it described what NATO had discovered through its military investigators, that in fact there was an extraterrestrial presence, and that some of these extraterrestrials looked so much like us that they were indistinguishable and they could easily infiltrate human society. And for the military hierarchy, this was a big concern because it meant that extraterrestrials could have infiltrated not only the upper echelons of the NATO military hierarchy, but have even infiltrated the political hierarchy of major nations such as the United States or Britain, France, and other countries. So Robert Dean's testimony really got a lot of people interested in this possibility that extraterrestrials could be living amongst us, because he had so much credibility, and he was actually holding that rank of Command Sergeant Major, which in the military hierarchy is the very senior non-commissioned ranking. So definitely that opened the door to many people considering this possibility.
And I also heard you talk about James Gilliland, and we've had the opportunity to speak with him here before at the Leak Project. Really cool guy. I've definitely got to get out to his ranch and video record some of the just amazing phenomenons that take place out there. But could you tell us a little bit about the experience you had out there?
Sure. Well, I went out there in 2006. I attended one of his conferences as a presenter, and then he had these nightly sky watchings, and I stayed there for a few days after the event, and it was frankly very impressive. I mean, what we were seeing in the sky were these lights that would travel across the sky, and James would do these intention experiments where he said, well, everyone send a thought to that light, and let's see what happens. And so as people did that, many of these lights would just kind of like pulse very, very brightly, and it seemed to be in some way connected to people's thoughts. So that was very impressive, because it seemed that whatever it was that was piloting that craft could somehow monitor human consciousness and respond to that. While it wasn't the reason why I got into this field, it certainly was a very impressive demonstration of something that could have been an extraterrestrial craft.
How close did it get to you guys?
It was very high. I mean, it was definitely well above the kind of height that an aircraft would be traveling. So we're talking about 50,000 feet or higher than that. So it was very distant, but it was just this pulsing that it would do periodically as it would go across the sky that got us interested.
And where does James think that they actually come from, the ones that he kind of manifests with his mind?
Well, James says that many of the craft that he sees from his Mount Adams ranch are associated with the Pleiadian extraterrestrials. He says that there's a base at Mount Adams, that these extraterrestrials have a base. And I can't remember if he said it was part of the Confederation of Planets, but certainly that's a term that's used by many whistleblower or many contactees like James to describe a kind of grouping of very positive, benevolent extraterrestrials that interact with private civilians. And James has a collection of photographs as well and videos showing some strange things coming out of the Mount Adams. So definitely there's some really interesting things happening up there, and I would recommend anyone to go up and have a look.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly incredible. Now, another thing too, when I was watching those different slides, in your presentation, there's different time frames, like all the way back to the 40s or 50s, I think, maybe even before that. And I was hoping you could tell us about the first well-documented case of the ET phenomenon.
Well, probably the most impressive person to have made these claims was George Adamski back in 1952, where he began meeting with beings that claimed to come from Venus and were very Nordic looking, kind of Northern European. And there were witnesses to that first encounter that he had in Desert Springs, California. This was in November of 1952, and there were 6 witnesses who saw a craft emerge after a larger cigar-shaped vehicle flew overhead. There were some Air Force jets kind of pursuing the vehicle, and then a smaller kind of circular scout craft suddenly appeared and landed near Adamski, and one of the occupants got out, and the 6 witnesses could see it at a distance. And Adamski proceeded to have a conversation with this being who said it was from Venus, and it was very concerned with the atomic or the nuclear weapons program that was underway at the time. And since that time there have been others. Probably the most impressive case of extraterrestrials amongst us was this case in Italy called the Friendship case that occurred from 1956 up until 1978, when a group of extraterrestrials were living amongst us, or living in an area of northern Italy, and meeting with up to 100 different witnesses, people, some of them occupying very senior positions in the Italian society. We're talking about a general in the police force, diplomats, and other kind of VIPs from other countries that were part of these meetings. And this occurred over that 22-year period, and there were quite a few shots or photographs of the flying saucers that were associated with these extraterrestrials. So there you have another case of very well documented extraterrestrial